As Israel prepares for a ground assault on Gaza in its war against Hamas, there are real fears of the war expanding, with Tehran now warning Tel Aviv against continued bombing of the Gaza Strip. What can the world do to avoid a catastrophe? United States Secretary of State Antony Blinken is in the region. He has met both the Israeli and the Palestinian leadership. What role can the United States play in this ongoing crisis? To talk about this and more, we are being joined straight from Washington, D.C., former United States National Security Advisor and envoy to the UN, John Bolton. Ambassador Bolton, really appreciate your time. Over 20 U.S. nationals killed and around 20 held hostage by Hamas. Is the U.S. now directly involved in the release of the hostages?
Well, I think right now the effort is diplomatic. I think Secretary of State Blinken is trying to see if some of the Gulf Arab states can persuade Hamas to release the U.S. hostages, but really all the hostages that they've taken, which could be as many as 150. I don't expect that effort to succeed. I think it was clearly part of the Hamas agenda to take hostages, to use them as bargaining chips. But I don't think there's much more time for diplomacy. I think Israeli troops are deployed around the Gaza Strip. And I think it's entirely possible that a land attack in response to what happened last Saturday could begin within 24 or 48 hours.
You are saying that the land attack could begin in the next 24 to 48 hours. You're kind of giving a timeline. What makes you so sure? You know, the reason why I'm asking this is, Ambassador Bolton, because as a former national security advisor, you have been involved in these kinds of decisions at the Oval Office. What makes this hostage situation precarious?
Well, I think the worst part of it is, and it's important for people to understand the strategic context, that this is not just a Hamas attack on Israel. I think Iran is the puppet master here. I don't think they would have given Hamas the quantity of missiles and drones and weapons and ammunition, intelligence, training, finance that they have over the last several years unless they intended to control it. So when you hear Iran warning Israel not to go after Hamas in the Gaza Strip, I think they're revealing what their real agenda is. But I can tell you from conversations that I've had that I think are apparent to anybody, the Israelis are determined not just to strike back against Hamas for their terrorist attack, but to remove the Hamas threat entirely.
But the question is that will it really mean also the end of Gaza? Because Hamas is in Gaza. And there are ordinary citizens as well. Because of this total siege, the reports that are coming in is of a total shutdown, absence of water, electricity, food.
Right. Well, Israel has not been in the Gaza Strip since 2007. So this is 16 years of Hamas rule. And a number of prior incursions which did not stop Hamas from engaging in further terrorist attacks. So the Israelis have given the civilians warning, which they are required to do and which they should do. But I don't think after watching the pictures of Israeli babies with their heads cut off and all manner of other unspeakable things that Hamas did, that you're going to stop the Israelis from going in. In fact, to show Hamas's brutality and really the barbarian nature of their conduct, they're using their own fellow Palestinian people, innocent civilians, as human shields. They are, in effect, daring the Israelis to come in. So I think this could be pretty grim. It won't be good for Israel or the Palestinians. This is the nature of the terrorist threat that Hamas and ultimately Iran represent.
Since you've spoken about those pictures, there has been some kind of walking back on comments by U.S. President Joe Biden, seeing pictures where babies were allegedly killed by Hamas operatives. Now, Secretary of State Antony Blinken has been shown these pictures. Would you say that this puts more pressure on the United States to act perhaps more?
Well, I think the United States should recognize the importance of Iran in this entire scenario. And I don't think the White House does appreciate it yet, because they're afraid if they acknowledge Iran's central role that they'll have to give up the objective of going back into the 2015 nuclear deal, and they know they'll have to take strong action against Iran. Over 20 Americans were killed in these attacks. Some unknown number, perhaps 15 to 20 Americans, are still being held hostage. So this was, in effect, an attack on Americans as well as an attack on Israel.
So you're calling this an attack on Americans as well. President Joe Biden's unprecedented words, which has been of support for Israel and moving of warships, United Kingdom also moving its warships closer. To what extent would the U.S. go in this support for Israel?
Well, I think it's unclear from what the Biden administration has said. I think their hope is that the Gerald Ford carrier battle group and yet another carrier that's been sent into the eastern Mediterranean will deter Iran and Hezbollah from taking action that causes further casualties. But, you know, Hamas in the past week has fired perhaps 5,000 missiles into Israel. In publicly available reports, we know that Hezbollah has over 100,000 missiles in the Bekaa Valley in Lebanon and elsewhere in Lebanon and Syria. Some estimates are as high as 150,000 missiles. So Hezbollah is really the bigger threat, and the question whether Hezbollah gets involved, I don't know the answer to it. I can't see the way ahead that clearly. But that's where the real threat of a much wider conflict could go.
Okay. The U.S. had been pushing for normalization of ties between Israel and the Arab world. The United States, Saudi, India corridor was a cornerstone of these efforts. Would you say that U.S. diplomatic efforts have not led to what was being hoped for, or would you be saying that it have perhaps now failed?
Well, I think it's suspended. I mean, I don't think you put together diplomatic relations between Israel and Saudi Arabia very quickly. There's a long history, to be sure. I think that is one of the reasons really behind Iran's strategy in deciding to launch attacks that would cause turmoil throughout the Middle East, because they fear very much that the Gulf Arab states in particular will develop, all of them will develop full diplomatic relations with Israel, very much to Iran's disadvantage. And I think they also worry about the corridor that was talked about at the G20, Europe through the Middle East to India. I think it's a fantastic idea. I think what I would say now, particularly for Saudi Arabia, is that normalization with Israel is on hold. I think it's just got to stop for a period of time, but I don't think it's derailed. And I think, in fact, quiet conversations could resume fairly quickly, not at the public level, but continuing to do the work and make progress. And my recommendation for India, as difficult as it is in these times, is to not to give up on that aspiration. It's a good idea and will benefit everybody involved. Also benefit the United States. So I think we ought to keep at it.
Ambassador Bolton, talking about this attack, and since you're talking about the involvement of Iran, to what extent do you think Tehran is involved in this attack? Is it part of the conspiracy or the sheer magnitude of this terror strike, which caught the mighty Israeli intelligence napping, that makes you think that Hamas doesn't really have capabilities, it must have received full support from Tehran?
Yeah, I think if you look at the history here, the amount of weaponry supplied to Hamas, their overall capabilities, the sophistication of the operation, the very fact, as you mentioned, that neither Israeli nor American intelligence picked this up, shows very careful planning over a long period of time. This is potentially a years-long operation. And I just don't think Hamas had anywhere near the capability to do it without Iran. some people say, well, we haven't found direct evidence of Iranian involvement. Number one, there's plenty of indirect evidence. And number two, as we were just discussing, since our intelligence missed the overall operation, why should anybody be surprised if they missed the Iranian authorization?
And as a security hawk, where do you think the Israeli establishment, be it the government or their spy agency, the Mossad, which had boasted of surveillance in Gaza, monitoring each and every movement, each and every corner, how did they not intercept any such intelligence transmission and planning of such a magnitude of an attack of this nature?
Well, we don't know, but nobody should underestimate how big a failure this was for Israeli intelligence and the U.S. and many other intelligence agencies too. It's very hard to keep a complex operation totally secret, and I think one of the things certainly Israel will do, I think the United States and others should do, is when there's time to do it, conduct a very thorough forensic examination of where the failure took place. Because I think our immediate concern is to ask, well, if we miss this, what else are we missing at the moment? Where might other threats be? You know, today is at the call of Hamas, a day of jihad in the Middle East and perhaps around the world. I think it's too early to say how successful that will be. But many people, even in the United States, are worried about Jewish synagogues being the targets for attacks. People in Europe, I think, are worried. The old saying, we don't know what we don't know, and it may well be there's a lot we don't know.
Ambassador, since you've spoken about that this on-ground onslaught could happen perhaps in the next 24 to 48 hours, why do you think it will happen? And is it because of the kind of build-up that is there on the Israeli side? And what about United States and other 4 countries, which includes UK and others, who have jointly issued statements backing Israel? How far do you think they'll go to defend Israel?
Well, I think there's a state of war now between Hamas and Israel. Certainly that's what Prime Minister Netanyahu has said. And I think it's important to understand that when you've been subject to a terrorist attack, as India has been subject to terrorist attacks, a nation has a legitimate right of self-defense. And that right of self-defense includes not merely retaliating for the specific attack, but eliminating the threat of future attacks from that same source. And I believe what Israel's objective here will be the destruction of Hamas's capability to engage in terrorism against Israel. So it's a very significant objective. It's not going to be easy to do, that's for sure, but I just think the government, the people of Israel have put up with this long enough, and they're determined not to put up with it anymore.
You're talking about that being the objective. What about the end game? What do you think is the end game for Israel is, and the rest of the world, I would also say, including the United States? Because Israel had the occupation of Gaza for decades. When they realized it wasn't really feasible for them, that is when they left Gaza.
Well, you know, the Palestinian people, because of now roughly 16 years of self-rule in the Gaza Strip, have made themselves a pariah. They've done this to themselves. Originally, Gaza was under Egyptian sovereignty at the end of World War II, and it was occupied by Israel only during the 1967 war. I think Israel would like nothing better than to see Egypt reassume sovereignty. The trouble is the government of Egypt doesn't want to reassume sovereignty. So, you know, it's a fair question to say, well, after Israel destroys Hamas, what comes next? And I don't think they know the answer to that, nor does anybody else. Just as in World War II, before the United States destroyed Germany, we had any idea what government would replace the Nazi government. But they'll figure it out when the time comes.
And Ambassador, there are historical mistakes, and if you go into history, there have been efforts at peace as well by Yasser Arafat and Yitzhak Rabin, the former Israeli prime minister. Today, when you look at the developments that are happening there, would you be a nihilist and say that peace is a distant dream in this region and something that will never perhaps ever happen? though there have been movements in the past, only recently, the Abraham Accords, efforts at normalization between Saudi and Israel, as we were just discussing, deal which was being brokered by the United States?
Well, I think the prospects are grim for a two-state solution. I'm not sure any state, any responsible democratic state would agree to have a terrorist state on its borders. And the cruel irony here is that in the ongoing negotiations to establish diplomatic relations between Saudi Arabia and Israel, there was a package being considered for the Palestinians. I don't know what it was. It has not been released publicly, but that prospect is off the table now. So the cruelty of the terrorist groups like Hamas and Hezbollah ultimately doesn't produce results against a determined democratic society like Israel, but it actually makes the fate of its own people worse.
My last question to you, of course there is a strong condemnation of what happened on Saturday. There cannot be any ifs and buts here. It is about unequivocal condemnation. Why do you think the intelligence shared by Egypt was overlooked by Israelis?
You know, I don't know exactly what the Egyptians shared. If it was general, you need to be worried about something happening in Gaza. That's not what we label actionable intelligence. It could well be it was significant and that Israel should have paid more attention to it. But I can tell you it's inevitable in history that after an intelligence failure, there's always somebody who said, hey, I told you and you didn't pay attention. Well, if you could get it right all the time, you'd be the perfect intelligence agent. But human beings are fallible, and there was a lot of fallibility on this one, no doubt about it.
Help us understand, how did the Israeli intelligence get it so wrong? And why did Hamas strike on the day they did? And there are these reports that are suggesting that perhaps Hamas used methods which were seen as old world, person-to-person contact in their preparations rather than using technology which could have been intercepted. And what about the famed Iron Dome? I mean, why was it not able to intercept this barrage of rockets that were, that came on Israel?
I think that the timing was chosen because it was almost exactly the 50th anniversary of the Yom Kippur War, which also caught Israel unaware and was the occasion for a lot of reflection after it as to how they missed it. What people do to evade surveillance is to think about where their vulnerabilities are and then try and find alternative means to accomplish the same objective. And it turns out if technical means of intercepting communications are being successful, they'll find something else where that technology can't intercept the communications. I think it's a lesson for the United States as well. I think an over-reliance on technical means and not relying enough on human intelligence sources is a big mistake. I think we need much better human intelligence, and it may well be the Israelis do as well.
A quick response from you on this question, because this is on everybody's mind. Who will play the peacemaker in this region now?
I'm not sure that anybody can play the peacemaker. I think the hope was that if the Abraham Accords could extend to Saudi Arabia, some of the other remaining Gulf Arab countries and other countries around the Islamic world, that a solution could have been found. I think all that has been set back, and to be an effective mediator, you need to have widespread trust, and I think after the Hamas attack last weekend, that just is not there anymore.
And after what has been said by Hamas with regards to hostage swap, do you think it's very difficult? Why is this hostage swap becoming very difficult from both the sides?
Well, I think Hamas clearly intends to use the hostages that it has to extract a very high price from Israel. And I don't think the Israelis are necessarily prepared to pay that price. I think from the U.S. point of view, the hostage swap recently with Iran shows why it's a mistake to bargain and to provide benefits for the exchange of hostage, $6 billion of unfrozen Iranian assets for 5 Americans. means that the cost of an American passport is now potentially $1.2 billion per person.
There are other nationals as well. Other countries have their citizens also in the custody of Hamas.
Yeah. I'm going to have to go after this question, but the answer on that is I think that the widespread indications about how many citizens of other countries were taken by surprise by Hamas shows really how international a country Israel is, and shows that this terrorism can affect everybody. This is not an Israeli problem. This is a global problem. And I think all states that oppose terrorism need to stand together here. Israel suffered a terrible hit, and they're going to try and solve the problem. We should stand with them.
All right, Ambassador Bolton, really appreciate your time. Thank you for speaking to NDTV. That's all from me. Thanks so much for watching.
Well, thank you.